screw them. You'll be talking about Orpheus, which was the startup that did the Sons of Anarchy game. So my thinking in joining them was that if they were able to get the Sons of Anarchy license, that they must have their stuff together a little bit. And it turns out that's not necessarily the case.
Welcome to the Fat Games Podcast. On this episode, we have a very special guest. He's a longtime friend of mine, and for the first time on this podcast, we are leaving the indie space and going AAA. I'd like to welcome Doug Demyen to the podcast. Thanks for joining us, Doug. How are you doing?
Not too shabby. How about you guys?
Oh, we're doing great.
Doing
I'm still
swell.
recovering from shingles, so if you were wondering about the scarring, that's where I got it from.
So on the previous podcast, I made a joke that Gary's brother gave him herpes.
Well, that would be technically true. You gave me chicken pox back in the day.
Yeah, we're explaining our jokes, and chicken pox is a herpes virus. So anyway, so Doug, welcome to the podcast. So happy you're here. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, how long you've been working in AAA, and what kind of got you there, and why you're doing this crazy racket?
Sure. So I've been working in video games for just about 15 years. After getting my bachelor degree with I went off to U of A to get my master's because of its proximity to and relationship with BioWare. So I ended up doing a master's in like pathfinding to try and do kind of a gamey thing, and pulled every string I could to get an interview with BioWare, and I got one and I got in somehow. So I worked there for a few years. First project I was on was unreleased. It was codenamed Revolver. I can talk about that now because it's in a book that BioWare released with like pictures and stuff of the 25 years they've been around. So shameless plug for that, I guess. After that, I was on Mass Effect 2 for a little bit. Then I transferred to BioWare Montreal, where I worked on Mass Effect 3. After that, I moved to Halifax and I worked for a few companies there. There was Silverback Productions, where I worked for like kind of smaller games. They were mostly hidden object games and a couple other things. Then I worked for Frontier, which was a satellite studio. They're a AAA company mostly out of Cambridge, England. And they briefly had a satellite studio in Halifax. Then I worked at a kind of a startup called Orpheus on a game for Sons of Anarchy, like a mobile game, which was quite the thing. Then I worked for Hothead, where I worked on other mobile games. So there was the Killshot series, and then the Halifax studio. This was another satellite studio for the main company. This time, the big one was in Vancouver. So after the Killshot games, Halifax kind of had its own game, which was called Mighty Battles, which was closest analog is like Clash Royale. And then after that, I came back to Edmonton and BioWare, where I kind of worked for a little bit at the tail end of Anthem, and now I'm working on something else. That,
Something else?
Yeah.
So mysterious.
Something that you're on NDA for?
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you anything that's not public, but you could Google what BioWare is working on now, and I'm sure you could get a couple of tidbits that
Could find some rumors and stuff.
Yeah.
So you mentioned at the very start of all that yes, we went to school together at the wonderful University of Regina. I actually had forgotten you did your master's degree in Edmonton. I completely forgot that part. So I didn't realize you had a master's degree, or at least I forgot. Great. It's all actually pretty. It was a long time. It's all really interesting. So, What did you think of working on mobile games?
Working on, I mean, I thought about the same as working on smaller games where it was the advantage of those is it's usually a smaller team, so there's a little less overhead. If you're attracted to kind of getting a feature done, getting it in, seeing it working very quickly, then that would be the type of development you'd like, whether or not it's indie games or mobile games or that kind of thing. They're definitely, as far as design goes, oh, I should mention, I didn't even say I'm a programmer. That's the side of games that I work on. Oh yeah, another thing I feel I should mention, all these things are my own opinions, blah, 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 check all the boxes.
Oh, he's got to do his disclaimer.
Yeah. So anyway, so mobile games design-wise kind of has their own world they live in as far as most things are free to play. You kind of either have to make your money with ads or you have to kind of convince people to spend a couple of bucks here and there to get whether it's loot or extra lives or whatever it is. So
Yes, we were quite unsuccessful at that with Burgle's Bounty, but anyway.
it's a tough market to actually get into, but the ones that make money just make crazy money.
So last podcast we had Andrew Garahan on from Computer Lunch, and they released Cell to Singularity, and it's got over 10 million downloads on Android. He has been quite successful with that game, and I'm very happy for him. But yes, as you said, they can make a ton of money.
Yeah, it's very sink or swim is my understanding of that market for sure.
Is there actually like much marketing that goes into these mobile apps that are successful, or is it mostly just pure luck?
It's a lot of marketing and that side of it. I got to see a little bit of it when I was at Hothead because they were actually pretty transparent as far as how it worked, which was kind of neat to see. And there's a lot of like statistics to that, and yeah, it's a whole art form to be like where to buy ads, how many to buy to, funnel however many people in, how many people can we convert to paying money or like to sticking around past a certain 30 days or whatever it is. So it's,
yeah, I attended when I was developing Burgle's Bounty, I attended a lot of sort of sessions on user retention, where to spend your money, how to capture the whales and get them to keep spending more and more and more. It was mobile game development didn't really seem like game development to me, and more like you're building
It was more like a
product
science
and
versus an
retention.
art.
yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, but you have to have the product there to actually to get them in the door, and then find ways to tweak the product to keep them.
Yeah. So I mean, making a game that has high retention is making a fun game. So there is that side of it, but then the side that, say marketing looks at it is very like math-like you said.
Right. So I'm going to take us away from mobile stuff because it's
Sour
what's that?
Sour spot, Blair?
Sour spot, perhaps, yes. But
Yeah.
I think anyone listening would probably be more interested to hear about Doug's work on Mass Effect 2 and 3. So you've already confirmed that you did some work on there. What can you tell us about that experience?
Let's see. In broad strokes. When I joined Mass Effect 2, it wasn't close to being done, but it was far enough that it had like a direction and that kind of stuff. So I wasn't on it like from the very genesis of the thing. But in broad strokes, I worked on design tools, so stuff for like writers and people making missions and that kind of thing. And also the lip sync type of stuff. So there's a whole pipeline for, the however many tens of thousands of lines of dialogue that there are in those games. So I looked after that, and I did some of the back-end tools and stuff for like maybe the DLC and stuff. So fun fact, I got an extra or additional programming credit on Mass Effect 2 for the DLC. So if you download every DLC, I'm in the credits like a dozen times or something.
Oh. So
Okay.
lip syncing, like how painstaking is that? That sounds incredibly difficult.
It's not done by hand. There's a whole bunch of technology involved.
Like, is it kind of like motion capture even of people's faces? Just like, I'm curious. What can you talk about, if anything?
I'm trying to think. I would say
History Secrets.
Yeah, there's a whole lot to it. Is probably what I can say. But yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, and looking after it was a full-time job. So,
wow. So what about for other languages and localizing? Did you do that too?
sort of a little bit. Like there are systems to do all that kinds of stuff, and it's sort of part of it. But that was mostly in other people's wheelhouses, I think. So yeah, and it wasn't, so it's a big system. I worked on it, and it wasn't just me. It's a big job for sure.
So I'm going to ask a question that's a little off script here. BioWare is now owned by EA. That's definitely no secret. Did anything change when that acquisition happened to sort of how you found your experience with the company?
That happened there when they bought it, but it was pretty close to the start. So EA, they definitely didn't they didn't come in with a big hammer and say you're doing everything our way. It would be probably a silly idea for them to do that because BioWare was already successful. That's why they bought them. So for the most part, there was a sense of what you're doing, and we don't want to disrupt that. But at the same time, there's there were a lot of tools and things at our disposal that being part of a big company afforded BioWare, which is good. So yeah, and now, I mean, they have all sorts of processes and things in place that, whether it's for HR and stuff, they don't just throw a bunch of millions of dollars over a fence and go like, well, we hope a game comes back. They do oversee it in some sense, but I mean, for the most part, I think BioWare has been left to do what they do best.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, kind of a hands-off approach. I mean, I think I've heard that a lot from acquisitions within the game industry from people I've talked to here in New York, that if a company is successful and they're making their financial numbers, the parent company kind of just leaves them alone and only really cracks down if things start to slip up.
Yeah, that is a good general rule for business, I think. So,
Right. So when you're working for some of those smaller companies I guess some of them were AAA companies, but when you're working those satellite offices out in Halifax, I know you had some less than positive experiences at I think one of them. Are you able to talk about that?
Yeah, because screw them. You'll be talking about Orpheus, which was the startup that did the Sons of Anarchy game. So my thinking in joining them was that if they were able to get the Sons of Anarchy license, that they must have their stuff together a little bit. And it turns out that's not necessarily the case. So I don't know who in software in general, but I think it's probably just on the spectrum of what you can expect from a startup. Things are a bit willy-nilly and stuff, and maybe sometimes they pan out and everybody who got in at the start's a bajillionaire, and then there's other times like this one where you don't know if you're going to get paid and if things are the right amount or what have you. And in this case, I mean, there were good and bad about how the company was run and how the project was done and that kind of thing. But the main thing is the guy who owned the company was, I will be diplomatic and say sketchy. And then I will be less diplomatic and say he's a scumbag. So yeah, when people aren't being paid and that kind of thing, things can fall apart pretty quickly. And that's kind of what happened there.
I can imagine. I don't think I would be too happy if I weren't getting paid.
No, and fun thing I learned, if the company you work for owes the CRA, which is the Canadian IRS for the American viewers, if they owe the CRA a bunch of money, the CRA can take money directly out of your bank account, which was fun to learn. So a paycheck just like weeks after I got it.
What? That sounds insane. The government, oh wow. Oh, that is so something that would not happen in America, but I can't say for sure that that's true or not. I mean, it just sounds like something that the Americans would hate.
I would have said there's no way that happened here either, but turned out that's not the case.
You would think you'd want the people to be paid before the government, but maybe not.
I think there was some funny business going on with that side of it too. So yeah, I can't say anything for certainty, but yeah, the whole situation was sketchy. So
that's I'm sorry you went through that. That sounds pretty awful. And that's probably one of the reasons you ended back at BioWare.
Yeah, all my paychecks since I came back here have been very prompt and correct.
Yeah, I mean, they're not. EA isn't exactly a small shop, so that's great. So pivoting a little bit. A few years ago, and actually EA was a little bit slammed by this in some of the gamer media. The questions about crunch time. How has that experience been? Has it gotten better or?
So I'll say, first of all, in my opinion, well, more than once there have been articles written about a place that I've worked at while I've been there, and they've theoretically talked to people from the company, and the articles have been so far off that it's almost beyond belief. So
it's a media narrative rather than the truth. That doesn't surprise me too much.
I mean, it's not to say that it doesn't happen, but I don't trust any articles at all, really. Anything where they kind of purport to know what's going on behind the scenes or anything, I kind of don't even bother with that kind of stuff. So I can only talk from my personal experience, and that is, a small slice of a few companies at certain times and that kind of thing. I have heard the odd bad story about crunch time, but for the most part, I haven't got anything too bad. Like in the 15 years I've worked in the game industry, I've probably done a year of crunch total. And I'd say 90% of that was voluntary, just kind of trying to, work a little bit extra here and there, pace myself so I'm not like making mistakes or completely burning myself out, and just get a lot of things done. Maybe a couple of times has been the kind of like, everybody's got to stay here until this is done or that kind of thing. But I think for the most part, that was remnants of like very early on in the industry when game teams were very small with like 23-year-olds, and they would work
and they're poorly managed, etc.
Yeah, or just they were very small and that kind of thing, and it probably kind of tapered off for a few years. But I think any company worth its salt kind of understands that people with experience are more valuable than somebody you just got. You can kind of squeeze them a little bit and then they leave. So and most people, now that the industry is a little more mature, people are homeowners, they have spouses, they have kids, and a lot of them if you told them, okay, you got to work 70 hours a week for the next year, they'll say, well, I'll just work somewhere else. And another company would be very happy to have them. So a lot of companies can't really, I mean, get away with being too bad. It definitely is a thing. Generally, I kind of plan to be kind of busy around the end of a project.
Yeah,
But
I mean, that makes sense for any project, regardless of the industry.
yeah, I was just going to say, like, you probably run into that in just general software, I imagine. And even like other salary jobs get it too. Like my mom was a banker and she worked more Saturdays the last year before she retired than I have in my whole career. So it does happen. Companies, for the most part, at least try to avoid it as much as you can, but realistically, unless you're Valve and you can survive because you get 30% of every video game ever, you eventually have to produce a game and it should make more money than it costs to make. So there's always a bit of pressure there, but companies are, for the most part, are getting better at managing it. And it's mostly about not kind of lying and going like, we're almost done, so we're going to keep our date here. And then, but everybody knows that's definitely not going to happen. So.
Yeah, I think from everything that generally happens in the game industry, it's better to be late than deliver something shitty.
Yeah, people are definitely better at not being impatient. I would say, like, gamers in general, but the other side of it is you can be infinitely patient and say, like, take another 10 years to make your game. And, if it makes it better, which is cool, but if that bankrupts the company, or if by the time they release it, they don't make back all that extra time, then it doesn't really help that they were patient. So there's always a little bit of that pressure for sure. You do have to be smart about it.
Right. Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Fat Games Podcast. If you're enjoying our material, please consider liking and subscribing. We also recently released the Kids of Karendow demo for free on Steam. Please consider checking it out. The link is in the description below. We are going back to the Burgle's Bounty music vault again with the graveyard music. Enjoy!